2020 was a crazy year. Between COVID, presidential elections, and mass riots, one incredible event has almost flew under the radar under such chaos: the Beirut blast. On the 4th of August, an explosion went off in the Port of Beirut, equivalent to that of 1.1 kilotons of TNT. The blast was so striking, it could be felt in a number of nearby countries: Turkey, Syria, Israel, Palestine, and even parts of Europe, including Cyprus 150 miles away. 215 people dead, 7,500 injured, and 300,000 people left homeless. Looking back, however, what was the full story behind such a crazy incident, and how was such a preventable disaster allowed to happen? This story starts back in September 2013 with a ship by the name of NV Rosas. The 280-foot-long cargo ship was chartered to carry 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate from Batuma, Georgia to Beirut, Mozambique. Ammonium nitrate is a chemical often used to create explosive mixtures in civil construction, mining and quarrying being two key examples. And while the load was described by the captain as dangerous, it was not totally uncommon for a delivery like this to be made. Having started its journey on the 13th of September, the ship made port in Beirut a couple of months later on the 21st of November. The reason for this stop is still disputed. Some sources claim that it was forced due to mechanical and engine issues, whilst others claim the owner did not have sufficient funds to pay the toll for the Suez Canal. One theory even suggests it tried to take on heavy machinery at a cost to pay these necessary fees, damaging the boat from overstocking. After inspection from Port State Control, the ship was deemed unseaworthy and forbidden to sail. Which brings us to the first question: who actually owned this vessel? You see, when the captain asked, he informed the port the de facto owner of the ship was a Russian national named Igor Grushukin, who was initially held responsible for the ship's condition and operating procedures. It was only years later that the true nature of the vessel was revealed in a report commissioned by the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Network. In this piece, it was discovered Igor was only leasing the vessel through an offshore account, Tito Shipping, registered in the Marshall Islands. The true owner of the ship was in fact a Cypriot shipping magnate named Charalambos Manoli. Manoli's ownership was registered via Brywood Corp, a business registered in Panama that was only later again revealed by historical court documents declaring Manoli as the true owner of this company. Details of the vessel were also released. Corroded decks, radio problems, and a lack of auxiliary power were all issues that plagued the ship. Records show two other companies Manoli owned, Geo Ship Company and Maritime Lloyd, helped certify the seaworthiness of the ship, allowing it to continually sail and endanger those on board. In addition, the report would also shine a light on FEM, the company in Mozambique. It was part of a network of companies linked to Mozambique's ruling elite and, more critically, had been investigated for illicit arms trafficking and supplying explosives to terrorists. Despite all of this, back in Beirut, the captain and his crew after seizure of the ship were effectively stranded. Grushukin had declared himself bankrupt, FEM never made an attempt to retrieve the cargo from the port, and the crew were unable to disembark due to visa restrictions, forcing them to live aboard an anchored ship for over a year with limited provisions.
Потому что 10 месяцев мы там находились в Бейруте, грузовладелец не объявился, ничем о себе не напомнил. И после этого мы с 2014 года, а груз выгрузили где-то, как я знаю, в 2015 вроде году, а может и в 2014, я не могу точно сказать.
With no one there to claim it, the Beirut port authorities eventually seized the ship in 2014. The cargo was brought ashore and placed in Warehouse 12 at the port. The boat would later go on to sink of its own accord in February 2018. So it was that Lebanon was left with 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate. What now? Now, the easiest thing you could do, of course, is to get rid of it. Customs officials have been handed the task of unpacking the best solution for this, although they would need court approval before proceeding with any of these options. They proposed a number of different methods: exporting to another country, selling it to private Lebanese explosive companies, or straight up just giving it to the military. And yet, year after year, no decision was reached, through no fault of customs officials, to be clear. Letters have been sent to a judge of urgent matters in Beirut, seeking guidance multiple times with no response. The 27th of June 2014, the 5th of December 2014, the 6th of May 2015, 20th of May 2016, the 13th of October 2016, and the 27th of October 2017. The pleas all fell on deaf ears. In one of the 2016 letters, having received no previous reply, it notes, "In view of the serious danger of keeping these goods in the hangar in unsuitable climate conditions, we reaffirm our request to the Marine Agency to re-export these goods immediately to preserve the safety of the port." The importance of this issue wasn't something that flew under the radar, particularly as the ammunition lay dormant in one of Lebanon's most important strategic and economic assets. Even worse, Warehouse 12 was positioned next to large grain silos housing 120,000 tons of cereal, kept as an emergency reserve in case of future disasters in the city. Why was it that no decision was made? You see, while the country had been slowly rebuilding after the devastation of its 15-year civil war, it came at a very heavy price. With a 152% debt to GDP ratio, Lebanon stands as the third most indebted country in the world, behind only Japan and Greece, with the interest payments consuming almost half of government revenues. For a country that produces so little and depends so heavily on imports, such as food, these payments mount up quickly, particularly when they needed to borrow heavily to pay for these imports. Lebanese banks were happy to borrow the government at a crazy high interest rate. However, the more this happened, the more global capital would eventually leave the country out of fear of economic collapse, which is ultimately what happened. By the end of 2019, banks began to ration the amount of dollar that people could withdraw from their accounts, leading to a collapse in the value of Lebanon's currency. It lost more than 80% of its value from October 2019 to July 2020. Food prices began to soar, poverty had risen past 50%, and there were mass protests in the streets in opposition of the government's response. Tied into all of this, of course, was COVID-19 that was putting additional strain on hospitals and medical supplies. When put in wider context, it becomes a little bit more understandable why this cargo was not necessarily a government's first priority. That was until August 4th, 2020. Another day in Beirut. With the port being one of the key economic assets of the country, it was as busy as you might imagine. Repairs were always being made, and on this day it so happened to be Warehouse 12. Reports by Lebanese state media and Reuters cited that welding work was being constructed on a hull outside the warehouse, later confirmed by the port general manager. He was quoted as saying, "We were asked to fix a door of the warehouse by state security, and we did that at noon, but what occurred in the afternoon, I have no idea." It was around 6 p.m. that day that it was noticed that a fire had broken out in Warehouse 12. The initial spread of the fire was not in the ammonium nitrate, but a stash of fireworks stored in the same hangar. The first explosion occurred around 6:07 p.m., likely triggered by the stored fireworks, which sent up a large cloud of smoke and firework flashes, the equivalent of around 1.5 to 2.5 tons of TNT. The fire and the first explosion, as you might imagine, led to many in the area to document what was occurring, and the footage they caught was what we saw around the world. $215 dead, 7,500 injured, 300,000 people homeless. The ammonium nitrate was the primary source of the devastating explosion. On its own, the substance is relatively safe to handle. However, a large amount laying dormant begins to decay and absorb moisture, eventually turning it into an enormous rock. Any chemical reaction, therefore, would be significantly more intense should it receive a spark, in this case from the initial firework explosions. The mushroom cloud seen in the footage, according to Andrei Seller, professor of chemistry at UCL, is produced from compressed air. You have a supersonic shockwave traveling through the air, the white spherical cloud which travels out from the center, expanding upwards. The air expands rapidly and cools suddenly, and the water condenses, which causes the cloud. The blast knocked out much of Beirut's infrastructure almost immediately, causing upwards of $15 billion worth of property damage, including the grain silos located in the port. Before and after pictures show the sheer scale of the impact, with the port turning almost completely to rubble. International donors pledged €250 million in aid to assist in the rebuilding process, though the journey would be a long one back to normality. In the immediate aftermath, Prime Minister Hassan Diab declared a 2-week state of emergency, though protests and riots erupted across Beirut with calls for resignation. Within the first few days, a number of cabinet members resigned, and as tensions continued to escalate, Diab stepped down as Prime Minister on the 10th of August.
لذلك أعلن اليوم استقالة هذه الحكومة. الله يحمي لبنان.
Almost a year on, and Lebanon is still feeling the full effects of this event. The dire state of their economy continues to handicap their rebuilding efforts, with victims saying the government continues to offer little reconstruction aid and unable to hold those responsible accountable. An inquiry led by Judge Fadi Sawan has hit nothing but brick walls after issuing indictments for Hassan Diab and 3 former cabinet ministers. None of these showed up for questioning. 2 sued the court to have Sawan removed. Even more incredibly, Hassan Diab remains as caretaker prime minister, with Saad Hariri of the Future Movement Party so far failing to form a government. What is clear is that there was negligence from a number of parties that led to this disaster. Manoli, Grushukin, Fem all had a role in failing to deal with a ship and cargo that they abandoned, not to of course mention the Lebanese government for ignoring multiple requests to address the ammonium nitrate. This actually isn't the first incident of an ammonium nitrate explosion. The 2015 Taijin explosion and the 1947 Texas City disaster are 2 other examples of similar detonations. Countries need to continue to take the storage of explosive material more seriously than ever. What is for certain is that through all of the chaos, the Lebanese people deserve justice. After going through such a horrible event that will take decades and decades to recover from. If you found this video informative, please like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where I'll be posting more documentary videos in the near future. Thanks for watching.